see. I can give it to Tony.
I hit report to the cloud, but I don't know where it goes.
It's okay. Right, guys, I wish you the best. Well, I'm so glad in here that Chantel is joining us. Welcome back, Chantel. That's a blessing. And
thank you, Abuna.
yeah, it's really a blessing. It's really a blessing.
Oh, thank you.
So as Happy and Lauren, it's been a while. I haven't seen you guys. Everything is okay?
All is good يا ابونا بركة صلواتك.
Love you too. ربنا معاك. ربنا معاك.
Hi, Abuna.
Hi, Lauren. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thank you.
Everything great. Mario and Patty and Andrew. That's great. منورين.
وحشتنا أبونا.
Thank you, Patty. Merci.
نورك يا بونا.
Merci. See you tomorrow, Mario. I'm going to see you tomorrow, by the way.
Yes, see you tomorrow, Buna.
Okay, great. Okay, guys, God be with you in the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. If you want to start recording, okay, start recording, okay. Okay, go ahead, Nadine.
Okay. We'll miss you, Abuna.
I'll miss you too. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I can't share my screen. Okay.
I think you can, but Luca has to make you a host, right?
Yeah, he just did.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, cool. Okay. You guys, I cleaned up my desktop for you. Okay.
A lot of purple.
What an honor.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I know. It wasn't purple before. I was like, no, I have to look like I have it together.
Wait, am I colorblind? I think that's pink.
It's purple.
It's like in between. So you're not wrong.
That's funny.
If I do this, can you guys see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So let me begin with a couple of caveats. My mom is watching all the musalsalat for Ramadan, and so if the internet is bad, just like tell me or chat me, and then I'll go tell her to turn it off. And then B, I have like a little bit of a migraine today, so I'm not like totally with it. So forgive me if I'm like slower or a little bit more confused. But okay, so the topic that, so I'll tell you what happened. So Mina gave me a list of topics and I looked through the list. I'm like, okay, what sticks out to me? And one of them was self-control and inner peace. And I was like, okay, this feels appropriate. Let me talk about this. And then I realized inner peace is such a big thing and I don't feel like I can competently talk about it. So then I was like, okay, what else can I talk about? And so self-control sounds like self-care. And so I wanted to have like a play on words. And so that's why I chose this topic. But I will also say that self-care is like one of those things that like we are always talking about as psychologists. But it took me maybe like 6 years to like understand what it is and not kind of like roll my eyes every time someone said you have to engage in more self-care, just because yeah, it's one of those things that we always talk about as psychologists in order for our maintenance, our upkeep, because we're like working with a lot of trauma, but it's not anything that we've ever really studied or learned. And I've also noticed a trend that every time the topic of self-care comes up in Christian settings and in church settings, there's always this like undertone of suspicion of like what is really self-care and is it kind of anti-Christian? Because when you think about it, well, okay, let me stop talking. I'll go to the next slide. So yeah, so hold that in mind, is that there is often this like undertone of suspicion, and is it really Christian? Is it too gluttonous? Does it veer on the side of selfishness? Is there an overemphasis on like pleasing the body versus like really taking care of your spiritual health? And so secularly, the answer to those questions is yes. And so I can see why in church settings, oftentimes this question comes up. So my attempt with this presentation is to talk about it in terms of a balance and how it is important and how I've kind of come to realize its importance, even though it took me like so long, and how it's not disconnected from our spiritual well-being. Okay, so first of all, what is self-care? According to Google, oh, and at any point, if you guys have any questions or don't like something I say, like please interrupt me, I don't mind. Okay, so what is self-care? According to Google, it is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. Okay, so it's an active thing on our part to protect ourselves from, falling down a spiral and and being too overwhelmed with stress and distress. One of my favorite supervisors ever said, forget everybody else's definition of self-care. This is the definition of self-care. It is giving yourself permission to do whatever it is that you need to do to feel rested. And I kind of like that one because it talks about giving yourself permission for a multitude of reasons, depending on religion, culture, gender. Somehow it just feels difficult for a lot of us to like give ourselves permission to do what we need to do to feel rested. It's difficult for us to like think that it's worthy, worthwhile, not self-indulgent, that kind of stuff. So the one thing I like about this definition is A, giving yourself permission, and then B, it's to feel rested. It isn't about like, self-care isn't about like elevating your mood dramatically or preventing any difficult things or difficult emotions, but it's just you paying attention to the importance of rest and rejuvenation. And then lastly, the goal of self-care is upkeep and maintenance. Sometimes self-care gets glorified as this thing that means like this is what's going to fix my problems, or this is what's going to heal some brokenness in me. And that's not really the case. Healing comes with time, healing comes with faith, healing comes with community. And in some cases, healing comes with therapy and medication. Self-care isn't about healing or fixing or undoing. Self-care is more about upkeep and maintenance in order to be stronger and to protect yourself from the daily stressors that could, shwaya ala shwaya, like really break us down. Does that make sense? I'm going to pretend you guys said yes. Okay. So
That makes sense.
cool. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So self-care in the Bible. Wait, did someone say something? Okay, cool. So self-care in the Bible, I typed this into Google and I found a few things and I was like, oh, cool. One is from Ezekiel. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. In plowing time and harvest you shall rest, which makes sense because God rested on the seventh day when he created the world. Next one, St. Luke. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. I love that one because sometimes we just need to like get away from other people. And again, there's a lot of pressures for us as Christians to be stewards and do stewardship and sacrifice for others and like take care of others, when in reality, like you can't really do that if you yourself are not well rested. If you are not well rested, then whatever care you give others is not going to be as good as it can be. So there's no shame in like having to take a step back. I had a supervisor once say, there's no shame in like if a friend calls you, if you have like a kind of friend who calls you a lot in crisis and you're just in a place where you just cannot deal with that, there's no shame in like not answering the phone. That one, like, of course you have to like, weigh out the situation, like, whatever, like how tired am I really, or am I just like really annoyed with this person, or can this person, like, will this person be okay if I don't pick up? And most of the time the answer is yes. If the answer is no, then like maybe you should, whatever. So that is, it's the principle. It's not prescriptive. Okay. And then the next one, which I kind of thought was funny because it's from St. Mark. He said to them, come aside by yourself to a deserted place and rest a while, for there were many coming and going and they did not even have time to eat. So eating is important, which is why I thought it was funny because it was St. Mark and like Egyptians like to eat. And so here we are. But food is an important thing and it's talked about in the Bible too. Rest is an important thing, and withdrawing and having your me time is an important thing. Okay, let's look a little bit deeper into what self-care is, because so it's taking care of the self, but then when you look at what the self is, it's not that complicated. We all know this. Like, we as human beings, we have like multiple components to what makes up who we are. We've got, okay, I cannot tell you how many classes I've been in where like professors and other psychologists like just go really, really deep and philosophical on like what the self truly is. And honestly, at the end of the day, they're all saying the same thing. What it is like we are complicated human beings with multiple components. Some of like part of that is our physical needs, our physical demands. Another one is our emotional needs. And then another one is our spiritual needs. Some might argue that those are not three separate things and like those are all one thing. whether you think they're all one thing or you think that they're three things that come together and are very much integrated and interdependent on each other, it doesn't really matter. All that it means is that when you are in the pursuit of taking care of yourself, that means that you care for yourself in body, spirit, and soul, and emotionally as well, which some would say is spirit. Okay, so that's why I like this picture, because it's like 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I kind of divided self-care, my understanding of self-care, into 3 levels: bodily, mental, and spiritual. Yeah, based on kind of like the 3 components of what makes up the self. And so the first one is bodily self-care. And this one is, like it sounds, is taking care of your body. And it is to not underestimate the importance of getting a good night's sleep, of feeding yourself healthy food at like important times, of exercise. And you know what? I don't know why I put this phone under bodily self-care. Let's just, whatever, it's okay. This phone represents picking up the phone and calling someone. So like community, friendship is very important. I also kind of like it because it might represent doing the opposite. Sometimes you need that, you need to not be pulled into other people's problems, and you need that space for yourself. And so it can be hanging up the phone. It shouldn't technically be under bodily self-care, but you know what? We need 4 pictures to make it look like a square. So here we go. So I remember my first year of grad school, they talked so much about this, about how important it is to eat healthy and to sleep and to maintain like a healthy regimen for those things. And I just kind of like underestimated the importance, because I was like, honestly, there's so many sad things in the world. Like, I mean, how is me taking a nap going to help with that? How is me drinking hot cocoa going to help with that? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And then the older I got, the more I realized like just how bad of a mood I'm in when I don't sleep well the night before, or if I get headaches, if I'm not like, if I go a long time without eating, and all of that stuff, like it just has a domino effect. It has an effect on my mood. It has an effect on how motivated I am to engage spiritually, all that stuff. And so, and it also, like, we have to be careful of kind of the Gnostic idea of the body and the soul are separate things, because like we are, as humans, we are bodies and we are souls. So they are interconnected, and we might value the soul and the spirit and the spiritual stuff. And of course that's so important. But in doing so, we might overlook our physical needs or just like downplay their importance. And that's not how you take care of us as human beings, like the way that God has made us. Like we are physical beings with physical needs. And so all I'm trying to say is try not to underestimate the importance of these things, especially now during the quarantine, where it's like, you know, you don't like have to like wake up as early as you used to. You don't have to, like, you can eat whatever you want. You can snack during the day, you know, that kind of stuff. It's like you're not held to the same demands as you were before, but it might be really important for your mental health and spiritual health to maintain those consistent scheduled practices. Any questions? Cool. Okay. So then the next component to self-care is mental or emotional. So I'm using mental and emotional interchangeably just for the sake of simplicity. So this is not like a psychological concept, but it is something that I've heard before from, like, you know, psychologists that I respect. And I kind of see it too, like in my work, is that anxiety and depression are almost like 2 sides of the same coin. And I'm going to talk about anxiety and depression a little bit, just because that's something that every single person goes through. There's so many mental health disorders that people, you know, that not everyone goes through. Like not everyone has bipolar, not everyone struggles with schizophrenia, but every single person at some point in their life will struggle with the sadness and the lack of pleasure and the meh quality of depression. And every single person at some point in their life will feel anxiety, have trouble sleeping, that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm talking about it. I also think that anxiety and depression, like, again, every single person in the world, because we're human beings and we live in a broken world, will likely experience both. But also they kind of go hand in hand. They're kind of like a personality type. So there are people who tend to lean towards anxiety a little bit more, and there are people who tend to lean towards depression a little bit more. So the people who tend to lean towards anxiety a little bit more are the ones that maybe have control issues, or like struggle like I shouldn't say have control issues. I'm not trying to place any judgment on anything, but what I mean is like they might struggle with like to really reckon with the fact that we don't have control in this life. And so they might err on the side of like, what's going on? What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And it activates the body and it keeps the mind going circularly. That's kind of how anxiety works. Like the thoughts are circular and the body is activated. That's why people who have anxiety sometimes need to engage in rituals to distract themselves or have a hard time sleeping. So one form of reacting to distress or stress is anxiety, which is activating. And then another way of reacting to stress or distress is a more depressive way, which is saying like, there's no point. It's a little bit different than acceptance. That kind of sounds like acceptance, like, well, whatever, you know, mishba ideya, whatever happens, happens. That's a little bit more of acceptance, but depression or the depressed type has a little bit more of like a giving up quality and like a hopeless quality. So whereas an anxious person might want to like fix the problem and do whatever they can to fix the problem, they won't rest until they feel some satisfaction. Someone who leans a little bit more depressed would like give up pretty quickly and just be like, things always end up bad anyways. There's no point. So I say this to say because people who tend to lean more towards anxiety, the self-care response to that, the self-care remedy to that would be more calming things, because anxiety is activating, so calming would be like kind of the way to go. So some tips or some things that like we share with our clients is deep breathing practices, grounding practices, finding alternative forms of energy release. So exercise could be a really good way. Again, with anxiety, especially if you're in a really anxious state, your mind will go circularly. So a lot of people have found that like doing things with their hands is relieving of like the circular thinking that's going in mind. A lot of people have found that it's not helpful, because when you're anxious, your heart beats really fast. So then if you like start running, or if you start exercising and doing exercise that makes your heart beat fast, like sometimes it heightens the symptoms and doesn't feel good. Other people have found relief. So it's kind of just what works for you. But finding an energy release source might be helpful. Mindfulness is helpful. I really like this one because mindfulness is based on like the philosophical practice of like letting go, which feels really connected to like us as Coptic people, our value of detachment, which I'll talk a little bit more in a few slides. And then the last one is called progressive muscle relaxation. This is a practice where you basically like flex every part of your body, but like part by part. So first, like you kind of like squeeze your hands, and then you flex your arms, and you do it like part by part. And so that is a way of releasing some pent up energy in your body. I've done progressive relaxation with a few of my clients, and 2 times clients have fallen asleep in the middle of session. And I was like, dang, either I'm boring or this really works. So that's something that's like a tip that I give people who have a hard time sleeping. So my plan is to compile a list of like resources and apps that like give you like examples of all of these or practices for all of these. And then I can send it to like Tony or Mina or someone, and they can send it out to the group if you guys think that would be helpful.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, and then maybe you guys don't know what grounding is. Okay, so real quick, deep breathing is so important. That's like, I work with kids, so I work a lot with parents. And something that's been the most helpful thing is for parents to learn that like when their kid does something like really annoying and like really is trying to push their buttons, instead of reacting immediately, like take a step back, deep breathe, a few deep breaths, and then come and then respond. And that makes a world of difference if you're able to upkeep that. And then grounding is when you're feeling really anxious and really in your head, grounding kind of brings you back down to earth. So it's like paying attention to your senses, like what you're seeing, what you're feeling, what you're smelling. And I'll send you guys more detailed resources for that. Okay, so that's the more of the anxiety side of things. Now we got the more depressive type. So for depressive types, where you might notice that you start to shower less, that it's harder for you to get out of bed when things are really stressful, that you feel either like a little bit more of sadness or more of just like purposelessness. Some important things is to activate yourself. So that would be the physical self-care that I mentioned before. So like, you know, eating well, sleeping well, maintaining that regimen. And there's also something called behavior activation. That's one of our most basic interventions for severe depression, which I'm not like, you don't have to do it if you have severe depression, but if you're finding it more difficult to be motivated, behavior activation is just this practice of like committing to one thing that is hard to do in that day. So instead of being overwhelmed by all the tasks that you have to do, just commit to, okay, today I'm going to go out and take a walk. No matter what, I'm going to make sure that I do that. And little by little, when you start to like have these little successes and then you get your body moving, a lot of times that alleviates some of like the sadness and the depression that lives in your body. And then also it's so important to reach out to others, especially if you don't feel like it. It's important to reach out to others who are people in your life who you feel like have good perspective, good sense of humor, but not in like a dismissive way, like making fun of you, but like, you know, can cheer you up a little bit. That stuff is important. And I have behavior activation underlined just because just in my work, I've noticed during this like shelter in place for the last 2 months, a lot of the kids have like fallen into, not a lot, but like the kids who are predisposed to depression before have fallen into more of like a lethargy and a fatigue and are not motivated to get up. And so I just noticed that that's something that's happening with the quarantine because there's less of a pressure to get up and go to school and go to work and that kind of stuff. So it's important that you keep that in mind for yourself. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. And then we are spiritual beings. This is not something that you're gonna like hear talked about a lot when the conversation of self-care comes up, especially like outside of the church and like the secular world, but it's extremely important, obviously. So just like there's certain practices that you do to like maintain your mental health and your physical health, there's also, of course, the practices that you have to engage in to maintain your spiritual well-being and to be on top of that, to be careful not to be lazy with that. And I shouldn't say lazy. I'm trying hard not to use the word lazy because I feel more often than not like lazy has such a moral implication, but when people are lacking motivation, it's not because of like a moral failing on their part. More often than not, it's because of a lack of motivation and a lack of a sense of purpose. And so if that's starting to be the case for you, then like reach out, talk to people, maybe engage in more physical self-care and see if that gives you more of the energy to do the spiritual self-care. Maybe engage in more of the mental health self-care and see if that gives you, you know, energy to do the spiritual self-care or the hope, you know. Sometimes it's energy, sometimes it's a lack of hope. And then something that I think is pretty cool is like incorporating God in the self-care practices. So on the previous page, I said like mindfulness, right? Mindfulness, a lot of times it consists of like guided imagery where you like imagine yourself in a peaceful place and you imagine your thoughts like either floating away in the water or like written on a raindrop and it washes off your skin. You can incorporate God in that. Like you can imagine what it'd be like to be sitting in the presence of God and what he might do with like those anxious thoughts that come up for you. Yeah, that's just an example that I can think of. Breathing can be such a beautiful spiritual thing. I mean, like the Bible talks so much about the breath of God. And I know I said this in my previous talk where like, you know, the word self, nefs, comes from the word nephes, which refers to the breath of God. So even in our being, you know, like we are like the result of the breath of God. And so breathing, I don't know, there could be something very spiritual about breathing. It doesn't have to be just like the belly breathing that like, you know, is talked about like on BuzzFeed. It could be, you can make it more of a spiritual thing. And then the last point that I have is I think spiritual awareness is really important. This is a practice, like if you go to confession regularly, this is a practice that will just naturally happen, which is just being honest and being aware and just, yeah, like being honest with yourself about the particular sins that plague you. Like what are your particular leanings, weaknesses, the sins that no matter how hard you try or how often you confess them, they tend to keep coming up. And then like just kind of paying attention to that and seeing like, is this reflective of other needs? Are there other things that I can do in addition to prayer, in addition to fasting, in addition to confession that can help me with that. Let me see. In the book that Andrew, you presented on, The Ancient Path, I forget what it's called, but I read parts of it. And the Desert Fathers were talking about how, like, if you, I forgot what they were talking about, but like, it's like if you suffer from the sin of pride, then it's also important that you are very careful about, no, if you suffer from the sin of lust, then it's also very important for you to pay attention to what you eat. So fasting can help with that. So do you see what I mean? Where it's like, you can attack the problem head on, but then you can also try to find like peripheral ways of helping with the problem. I know I went off tangent. Stop me if I'm confusing anybody, but yeah. Okay. What else did I want to say about this? Oh, okay. Now this is the part, you know how earlier in the talk I talked about how sometimes it feels like self-care conflicts with our values as Christians, especially as Coptic Christians, and how, like, I've heard this so many times, like so often I'd be in talks and the topic of talks at church, and the topic of self-care comes up, and then people, like, you know, are just like, but when does it like veer on the side of not good? And what about like detachment and self-discipline and denial and that kind of stuff? And I can understand where those questions are coming from. I really can. And this is not me trying to give guidance on how to find the balance between the two, but it's just me recognizing that there is a balance that needs to be struck, because some important values in our tradition is discipline. Like, we fast so much, and it is self-denial. Again, we fast so much, and it is detachment, that like what is happening, like as strangers in the world, there we go, as strangers in the world, like what is happening, like we're not part of, like, we are strangers of this world. So it's important for us to like increase our spirituality so that we're not so attached to like bodily and material things. And then another thing that is really big in the Coptic church, and I'm telling you is like not that big in other denominations, is that we attribute so much value and grace and improvement to suffering. Like, we value suffering like no other Christian community does. And so there might be this feeling of like, this sense of like, we're so often told to accept our suffering. So if self-care sounds like doing whatever you can to fight the suffering, that's not what I'm trying to say. Like, you can accept suffering, and at the same time you can engage in self-care, because self-care will make you a little bit more open and accepting of the suffering and the lessons that it could teach you, and the reality that suffering happens in this life in ways that we cannot control. So I forgot what else I wanted to say about this. All I'm saying is that I can understand where the conflict might come from. I can understand why people might be a little bit suspicious of this, or why I've seen that a lot in the church. I can also understand that there might be a tendency to divide the body and the soul. But I don't think that they're two separate things. I think they're very interdependent. Yeah. What do you guys think? I only have one more slide after this, so I'm almost done.
Is it okay if I talk?
Yes. Who are you?
Joe.
No. I veto that.
No. I decided not to listen to you. Anyways, I do kind of think where you're getting at that it is important to have self-control and self-discipline, because even Christ said we are not of this world.
Yeah.
That we're not pertaining to this world. So sometimes we fall into this trap, like, oh, why aren't you doing this? Or why are you doing this kind of stuff? And, you know, it's kind of, we get shy sometimes of it, saying it. But what I've been what I've been like doing myself is to remember or remind myself why am I doing what I'm doing, or why am I following what we're told by the church. Is not so much because, and I think we go back to even free will. Christ gave us free will. So if you don't want to do it, you don't necessarily have to do it. You don't have to do it. But again, if you want to receive salvation, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
More or less.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah, I like your 2 cents. Thank you. Yeah. And it's even like being good to ourselves too, to like, let me see what the chat says. But yeah, it's even being like it is good to ourselves to follow Christ and to do what he wants us to do, even if that means like, you know, not eating meat and like going to church for hours and it's exhausting. That's doing good for us too, because you know that's where we belong, is with God. There was something I wanted to say. Oh yeah. Self-care, the way that I hear self-care talked about. So I work in a trauma clinic where all the clients that we get are like kids who are in the foster care system or have been adopted. And so every kid that comes through our doors has had some form of like really bad abuse. And more often than not, it's like multiple forms of abuse. And it's hard and it's sad. And so we talk about self-care a lot in like my work, in order to like, you know, prevent burnout and like survive this. What was I gonna say with that? Oh yeah. So the way that self-care is talked about more often than not, it's almost like, it's kind of like this, I forget the word because I have a migraine, I can't remember, but it's like pleasing yourself in whatever way necessary. So if like you want to eat that chocolate cake, you eat that chocolate cake. If you want to cancel a meeting because you need to take a nap, you cancel the meeting and you take the nap. That's just how self-care is talked about. But then I can see how that conflicts, because there's gonna be some times where we're fasting and we can't eat the chocolate cake, or there's sometimes where like, oh my God, I'm so tired, but going to church is gonna do more good for me than sleeping in a little bit longer. So that's where I can see some of the like where these two things can conflict. And so this is where I want to add my 2 cents about the definition, like that it isn't about doing what you need to do to feel feelings of pleasure. It's about doing what you need to do in order to feel feelings of restfulness. And kind of to your point, Joe, like connecting back to like your purpose and your conviction. And a lot of times when we get to the point of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? When you ask yourself, when you really think about your purpose and what convictions are inside of you, then it kind of like orients you to why you're doing what you're doing. I don't know if that's what you were saying, Joe, or if I just like added something. But
No, it's right on key is what you're saying. Is what I said is what you're repeating. Yeah, I agree.
So I have a question, because I that what you just said kind of really resonated with me, because a lot of times I would feel like I've gone through a great ordeal, let's say like passing a final or something you really worked really hard on. You kind of want to reward yourself, and you make an excuse that this reward is for your sanity and kind of your own, I guess, I don't know, you feel like you deserve it. There's something that you just wish you can kind of reward yourself after putting all that hard work. And I guess the fine line is understanding the difference between, you know, giving yourself a break and spiritual laxity. You know, kind of understanding, because I think it's sometimes a little more nuanced. Obviously, if the church is telling you we're in a fasting period, it might be a little bit easier to tell the difference. But if we're not, and the church is, you know, it's like, yeah, you can eat whatever you want, it's kind of hard, because not everything we have in our faith is necessarily prescriptive, and not everything is the same for each individual. Not everybody is at the same spiritual level either. So it can be kind of difficult. We tend to like to make excuses too.
Yeah. So trying your very best I feel you. I totally feel you. And it can be insidious of like, I deserve this. And you do. And so what if you like want to eat a piece of cake? And so what if you want to like binge watch a show on Netflix? Like, who cares? Like, that's fine. But I can see that it can be like this insidious thing that like might get out of control, and then it might result in some laxity in different areas of our life. Spiritual, mental.
Add to that, even like some people say, you know, it's not because we're at different spiritual levels, we tend to create these different categories of development. It's like, well, you're here, so I'm not there with you. I'm down here. And so for me, it's probably okay. I'm not saying necessarily that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what we tend to do, is we put people on certain pedestals, like saints.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, of course they could pray all night long. They're saints. What do you expect? But I'm just an average everyday Joe. So I'm not, you know, that's not at my level, and therefore I don't have to, you know, kill myself, you know. And it's also, people, they say this in Sunday school, the Egbeya, nobody expects you to pray the whole Egbeya. That would be bad. That's not good for your spiritual level to do the whole Egbeya all in one shot. You know, you have to grow through different stages, and over time you can add to your spiritual discipline.
Yeah. So then always maybe striving not for, you know, because if we look at to the great, we can always look to the greatness for as examples, of course, and we should, but not looking to the greatness as either an excuse of like, oh, that's not expected of me, nothing of that, like that intensity is expected of me, but also not looking to the greatness of like, that is expected of me and I have to hurry up and do it, but really kind of looking at where, being honest with yourself and where you are spiritually and what is the next step, like what is the level 1 above you, not the level 55 above you.
I agree. And that's why I think, like you said, we shouldn't go to either extremes. And I think some of that has to do with having like some spiritual guidance, because I think when we typically make ourselves our own spiritual gurus, spiritual guides, we tend to either be really, really harsh on ourselves or very, very lax. And it doesn't make a good recipe for success.
Yes, I 100% agree. There's this saying in psychology where you are your, well, okay, I'll say it. You are your own worst therapist. So because of that reason, we have a tendency to go this way or that way, just, you know, for whatever reasons. And I could see the same thing in terms of our spiritual life.
Nadine, I had a quick kind of question with like emotional boundaries and sort of like self-care. Like as a therapist, how do you like how do you establish those boundaries? But I think also like I feel like emotional boundaries look different for Christians because I think like of how our culture and like religion are often intertwined, but also how we're told to like serve, obviously, right? And so how do you establish those emotional boundaries as a Christian, like in your practice?
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm still really bad at it. But I mean, I think I've gotten better at it because I think I've just like I've let go a little bit of that pressure to like always serve and always take care of and always help, which I feel like is implied so often in the Christian faith. But then like we have to be honest, it's implied a lot more for women too, and it's also implied a lot more for people from like collectivistic cultures where there's more of a value of like community and that kind of stuff. So kind of realizing those things, it's like giving me a little bit more permission to put those emotional boundaries and to say no to things. I still struggle with that. And then another thing that is important to ask yourself, like it's important to really ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? Like, what's motivating me? Because so often, like the desire to help others comes from a more of a self-serving desire to either prove something to yourself or prove something to the other person or to gain favor in some way, right? And so that's not a bad thing. That's natural. I honestly think that sometimes like that's how God made us. Is like there is something self-serving about altruism, and it's kind of necessary because if that wasn't there, then we would be less altruistic as people. That's just my theory. So, but really to ask yourself what's driving that, and then to ask yourself the other question of like, in this position, like in this particular experience, like if I were to say no and I were to place that boundary, like what would the fallout be? And when you're earlier in your process, you're going to assume that the fallout is going to be worse than it actually is. Like so often, like the thought is like, oh no, this person isn't going to be okay if I don't pick up the phone, or oh no, this family isn't going to be okay if I extend this session to an hour and a half instead of an hour, that kind of stuff. When in reality, we're not as powerful as we think we are. And more often than not, like they'll be okay if we say no, you know. And then there are instances, you know, there are always exceptions to the rule. There are instances where like maybe the person won't be okay. So then you have to hold that, look at previous behaviors, look at patterns, look at what you really think, that kind of stuff. But I'll just tell you, like today I had a migraine and I had a session with a grandmother. Like I work with the little boy and I talk to the grandmother every week. And this is a woman who it's sessions with her are really difficult. She, like her son died by suicide last year and she found him. She was the one that found him. So when I'm talking to her and she's sharing this stuff, it's like, it's heavy. And so I have to be in like a mental place to really receive that and really be there for her. But today I was like, I had a really bad migraine, but I was like, no, I'm going to do it anyways, because haram, I don't want to cancel on her the last minute. And during the session, I couldn't stop yawning, not because I was tired, but that's like a symptom of migraines. And she caught it and she's like, you know what, it seems like I'm boring you. And she got mad at me. And then that for me was just this stark realization of like, there was no shame if I would have called her before and said, listen, I'm so sorry, I'm not in the right space to have a session with you today. Can we reschedule to Monday or to Tuesday, because Monday's off. And that was just like another realization of how important it is to, like, you can't give that the best care that you can give if you are not taking care of yourself. So yeah, I still really, really struggle with that.
Thanks. I'm asking because you work with youth, like kids at risk, you know, and like children. So I'm always like, how do you even separate that with a child? Like, how can you not be there for a child? Like, I don't know, like emotionally invested. But yeah, it's definitely like practice.
Yeah, let me talk with you more about that after, because there is something very, 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 very therapeutic about having boundaries. And then when you break the boundaries, it can hurt the child, even if that means like extending the session or having an extra session when it's not needed. So I'd be happy to talk with you more about that. But then also the emotional practice of how do you let go of the pain that you see happening in the world and sitting with it. I'd be happy to talk more about that.
Sweet.
I just don't have any articulate thoughts right now about it.
It's totally good. Thanks, Nadine.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then the last point that I want to talk about is like when it's not enough, like when it doesn't hit the spot. And something that you said, Tony, I think I lost it, but something that you said made me think of this question. Oh yeah. And it's like our tendency to be a little bit more lax. I feel like it kind of relates to this because we can engage in like, so this is the thing, you have to be honest with yourself. Like you can engage in all the self-care in the world. Like I have like my coworkers, they're really, really struggling. Like, okay, I feel like, not to sound cocky, this isn't cocky, but I feel like I have an advantage over them because I have a spiritual background, because I'm religious, that I have an advantage over them in terms of dealing with like the really difficult stuff that we see at work. And no one else in like my cohort like is practicing any faith. And so I've noticed like a stark difference in the way that we deal with stress. And I also noticed that like they have to take more PTO, they feel more tired more often, whereas I feel like I don't have to take that much PTO, and I feel like my boundaries are like can protect me. And so I think like, you know, having the spiritual background really helps. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because my coworkers who are like always tired, always taking PTO, always really like just can't find the motivation to do the paperwork that we have to do, all that stuff, they engage a lot in self-care. Like they engage in self-care a lot, but sometimes the self-care that you're engaging in doesn't hit the need. So if you're engaging in a lot of physical self-care where you allow yourself to like eat whatever you want or drink how much you want or sleep in as much as you want, and you're seeing that these things are increasing but the need is not decreasing, then something's up. Either you maybe have to switch the realm of self-care, maybe go into more of a mental self-care, more into a spiritual self-care, or maybe something else is going on that's a little bit more serious and self-care can help, you know? So that's what I'm trying to say, is that like pay attention to what's happening to the desire and the need for rest, if it's decreasing or if it's staying the same or if it's increasing despite your efforts. And then think about like what other things you can do. And this is the caveat that or something that I just want to say, like anytime I give a talk, I think it's an important thing to say is that, you know, when things like anxiety and depression are really strong and really consistent and situation and independent of the situation and impact you, like they impact your functioning at work or at school or at home, then it's important to consider therapy or consider medication or talk to someone who like from a professional sense who knows. It is always important to talk to your spiritual father. It is always important to engage spiritually, but sometimes you also need that extra layer of professional help, and there is no shame in that whatsoever.
Nadine?
Anybody could use it at any point. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on, for those who, in the process of self-care, reach out or look into like self-help books that may or may not necessarily be like psychologically focused. I just kind of wanted your opinion. Like, what do you think about that? Like somebody going and like I know not necessarily all self-help books are equal necessarily, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were.
I think self-help books are great.
Hmm.
Yeah. I personally, like when I recommend books, like I look at the author and if they have like a background in psychology or like clergy, that kind of stuff. Or like a background in theology, that kind of stuff. Because like anybody could write a self-help book, but honestly, it's not. I think they're great. Is there a reason why? Like,
no, I just wondered because sometimes I don't know if this is an opinion of like experts, but you always are weary of the kind of information you get because some of the sources may not be credible. It might come from a bias or a point of view that may be in contradiction with our fundamental beliefs.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. Now, obviously, somebody who does this should probably do what you said and look into the background of the author. You know, are they of a different sort of, I don't know, belief? I just wanted your general point of view, what you thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I always look at the author when I recommend books. But in terms of like our Christian values, that's harder because, I mean, because we operate under different philosophies. Like non-Christian people operate under the philosophy of like self-actualization and pleasing the self. And I'm not trying to place judgment, I'm not, but that is like at the core, that's what Western psychology is all about, is like how for you to reach the best that you can be for yourself. And how some of the most important goals in life is self-actualization, becoming who you really are, sort of a thing. And that's not a bad thing, but it leaves God out of the picture, and it's kind of too self-focused of a view. So it's hard to answer your question because I'm sure that like, you know, books written by non-Christian psychologists or MFTs will like that stuff will be saturated, you know, that mentality will be saturated in the type of interventions that they give. But it's not that hard to, especially if you're clear on your faith, or if you have someone who, and we're never clear on our faith by ourselves. We always need like edifying presence in our life. We always need like friends who have like, who are spiritual and like, you know, like Abuna and that kind of stuff. But if you have that community like within yourself and outside of yourself that can help kind of like compare and contrast and like set you straight if like things don't feel right, then I don't think it'll be that difficult to navigate.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'm done. Any other questions or anything? Okay, well, I do want to say, if you ever have any questions, but you're like shy and don't want to ask it in public or whatever, please feel free to message me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Like, I'm here. And please don't be shy and don't be embarrassed if things are coming up that like you don't want to talk about with other people. Like, I don't judge, I promise. So if anyone needs, like, if anyone has any questions or needs help doing anything like finding help or whatever, please know that I'm here. And then also, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, and then I'm gonna make a list of resources for like, you know, the mindfulness and the deep breathing and that kind of stuff, and I'll send it. Is it cool if I send it to you, Tony?
Yeah, actually, you could send it to me, or you can just go ahead and post it on the Facebook group.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You can drag it, I think, in the chat box or whatever, and it should work. If not, then you can send it to me, and I can somehow figure it out.
Don't send it to Tony. He's not gonna do anything with it.
No, that has not been my experience.
Shot down. Get out of here.
That hurts.
Yeah. Sorry, Joe.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, I can post it on the Facebook group.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful talk. It was really good.
Thanks, everybody.
I just want to remind everybody that on Sunday, we're continuing